The next issue is in the name of Deputy Cathrach Connolly to ask the Minister for Housing, Local Government and Heritage to discuss severe staff shortages in Galway City Council and the cancellation of some essential services. The Deputy has 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for standing in. I'm not sure why the relevant Minister is not here, but I understand that you're standing in. But this is a serious issue in relation to Galway City, a city that has been designated as one of the 5 cities to grow its population by 50%. And here am I raising a matter under a topical issue to draw attention to what the crisis in Galway. We know from the councillors' reports and from press reports that there's a staff crisis. And that staff crisis seems to have arisen for a number of reasons. 1, there's a legacy issue. 2, there seems to be a cap, but it's difficult to actually work out where the problem is with the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform setting a cap. And then there seems to be management issues in relation to not extending a temporary panel. So the upshot is we now have a situation where there's over a 10% vacancy rate in a city that has a budget of 103 million and with serious plans. And we received a presentation lately, all councillors in the area, I have it here, Regenerating Galway City up to 2030, and it set out their ambitious plans, both public and private development, 4 billion there. And yet we can't continue with a service that was brilliant in collecting bulky services in a time where bringing people on board is extremely important, and Galway people have always shown the way. So what do management in Galway do in a crisis? They cut the bulky service and they cut the sweeping of the city. Now, I don't know where the problem is. I've tried, I've read, and I was there myself for a long time. But it seems to me with a budget of 103 million in a city that's growing all the time, that there's something seriously wrong where we have a paper report telling us that the Directorate of Services said we had an over-dependency on the contract system because that was our only option. But we are trying to get the department to agree to a new headcount. We are having difficulty engaging with the department, but we've been talking to them for 1.5 years. Presumably that's both departments, or is that the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform? The Chief Executive said cuts to services, he said, were temporary, and they were in the process of recruiting general operatives. Now, in relation to general operatives, it must be the easiest part of the solution. There was a panel, and just towards the end of January, that panel was not renewed, and the general operatives that were there on temporary contracts were let go. And rather than extending the panel for a particular period until we got permanent general operatives, the wise management decided to let them go and have a gap in service. Now, I could go on, Minister, I'm not going to, but hopefully you have a response that makes some sense out of this as to where the solution to this problem is and the role of both departments, the Public Expenditure and Reform and Housing and Local Government.
Thank you, gComhairle, and I can thank cComhairle Deputy Connolly for raising a very important issue around staff shortages in Galway City Council, and that this has led to the cancellation of some essential services in the city. To begin, I would like to clarify that under Section 159 of the Local Government Act of 2001, the Chief Executive is responsible for staffing and organisational arrangements necessary for carrying out the functions of the local authority. I'm aware that Galway City Council has some current staffing gaps which have been exacerbated by the impact of COVID-19 Omicron variant. However, the number of staff unavailable due to COVID-19 is reducing. In addition, there are other staffing gaps deriving from the natural rotation of staff. I understand that active recruitment is ongoing with a view to filling the immediate gaps over the next 2 weeks. With regard to staffing numbers generally, Galway City Council staff numbers reached their lowest level at 418.5 full-time equivalents in 2015. And since that time, there has been a managed upward trend reaching 504.4 full-time equivalents by the end of 2020. There will continue to be gradual increases in staff numbers over the next few years to reflect the new skills required within the sector. Local authorities will be undertaking a new strategic workforce planning exercise, which will focus on strategic priorities, deployment of current staff to deliver key priorities, and the identification of skills gaps going forward, which will be required to meet the strategic priorities. An ambitious local authority people strategy was launched in 2018, which sets the strategic human resources agenda for the period of 2019 to 2024. Across all schemes and funding sources, my department provided $57.2 million in 2019 and $82 million in 2020 to Galway City. The increase year on year is due to the COVID support provided to the local government sector since the start of the pandemic. The allocation to Galway City Council from local property tax for 2022 is $6.7 million, of which $4.3 million is for the authority's own discretionary purposes, with the remainder used to fund the provision of housing services in the city. It is relevant in this context that the elected members of Galway City Council have had the option over the past 8 years to increase the local LPT rate if additional income is necessary. As with all budgetary matters, such decisions are reserved functions of councillors. In that time, Galway City has never applied any local variation to the LPT rate. As have been the case since the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic, my department will continue to engage regularly and constructively with the local government sector and with individual local authorities on the impacts of the pandemic.
Minister, I'm not sure which department you're representing.
Housing.
Housing, thank you. Well, perhaps the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform should be here. There's something seriously wrong when we get an answer like this, that they haven't upped or down their property tax. That's an unacceptable answer. What we have here is management and his CEO and a substantial salary telling us that and the director telling us that they need approval if they're going to take on new staff. Now, there's a simple and straight answer to that. If you're not able to give it, just tell us that. So when I get an answer like this that tells me, and I spent 17 years, I know exactly what powers local authorities have, but we have a city manager saying we don't have the approval of the department, or at least the Director of Services saying that. Then we have a practical matter like a panel for general operatives that wasn't extended, so that we didn't have to have this break in service. And one of the answers given in relation to that was that they need approval of the department, even for the addition of the employment of general operatives. Now, I find that very hard to accept, because I understand it's only above a certain grade and a certain salary that they need the approval of the department. Could you clarify that for me tonight? Does City Council need the approval of either department in relation to extending a panel for general operatives so that there's no gap in services, and are taking on extra general operatives? Does that need the approval of the departments? And generally, do you think it's acceptable for a city like Galway, destined to be the city that will balance the development of Dublin, which is out of control on the western side, to have balanced development, that they're struggling like this to provide basic services, something as basic as the collection of a bulky service, which the people of Galway have come to use and trust? Is that acceptable? And how are we going to tease this out when we have a whole, this is a presentation from the management in relation to the amount of duties and obligations they have and the staff they need, and then we have an answer like this from the department. Something is seriously, I'm over time. Something is seriously amiss.
Thank you, Gaillimhe. Unfortunately, I don't have a specific answer to the question in relation to the need for approval by department in relation to extending panels or hiring specific staff, but I will bring that to the attention to the Minister for Housing and endeavour to get an answer for Ceisteanna Tráthúla. I will finish with an important point, which, bearing in mind the concerns raised, puts the situation into context. Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic has presented challenges to local authorities in respect of delivery of services. In recent weeks, in line with trends among the general population, local authorities have experienced heightened disruptions due to the transmissibility of the COVID-19 Omicron variant, meaning that a number of staff were unavailable for work. With the ongoing return to the Galway City Council workforce of staff affected by COVID-19 and new staff taking up duty in the impacted departments of the Council shortly, the temporary interruption to two services out of the significant range of services provided by Council will be resolved in the coming days. Thank you.